It's your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso. Welcome back. We're live on SABC3. And as you can see, load shedding is causing a bit of a problem. And everybody knows that. But offshore wind energy could actually solve SA's energy woes. And this is according to Gordon Ray and many other world-leading countries and experts. Gordon Ray is a published author and Master of Engineering graduate from the Department of Mechanical and Mechatronic Engineering at the University of Stellenbosch. And he connects with us all the way from London to tell us more about this. Gordon, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's so good having you in the studio, man. And I just hearing from your title, you're like the slayer of physics and maths, which I think everybody's already envious of, man. But listen, let's get straight into it. From your genius point of view, of course, why do you recommend that South Africa needs to start tapping into offshore energy and I would say natural energy sources at the moment?
Right. So the first answer to that is obviously the current electricity crisis. So South Africa needs to start looking for new generation capacity to overcome the short-term electricity supply gap. So this electricity supply gap is the current issue to load shedding at the moment, and we need to find additional new generation capacity at a short-term sort of scale. But if we look more towards long-term and South Africa's future electricity demand, so if we look at predictions, we see that the electricity demand is expected to increase by around 57% by 2050. So this just shows that there's a huge demand for electricity, and this will sort of play its role when we see the electrification of the transport industry, electrification of the heating industry. So looking at a long-term sort of aspect, we have huge demand for electricity. And obviously, if we want to meet our commitment to the Paris Agreement, we need to look for renewable energy as a means of sort of decarbonizing the energy sector. So there's just this huge push to look for solutions and look for clean, sustainable solutions to energy security in South Africa.
Well, decarbonizing is what you mentioned now, Gordon. And besides reducing that carbon footprint, what are the other benefits that you foresee in the future using something like offshore wind turbines for South Africa?
Yes, so the obvious one is sort of assisting South Africa in its just transition towards a decarbonized energy sector, like you mentioned. But on top of this, we see a lot more benefits coming from offshore wind energy. And if we look at the socio-economic benefits, so offshore wind energy can facilitate South Africa's green economic recovery by, first of all, attracting foreign investment and creating green jobs. So there's huge potential because we're seeing international financial institutions such as the World Bank and the IFC, and they've already publicized their support to commit to supporting offshore wind energy in developing countries. If we move over to sort of technological benefits, we see offshore wind has access to better wind resources. We're able to increase the scale of these offshore wind turbines. So onshore, we'll see wind turbines reaching a scale of about 7 megawatts. But as soon as we go offshore, we can get these turbines to reach a scale of 12 megawatts, so almost double. And this allows us to have much larger installed capacities, higher capacity factors, and hence we can just generate a lot more electricity using offshore wind energy.
Jeez, Gordon, those numbers sound impressive, but when you're speaking about that, in layman's terms, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that with the current demand and the expected demand in the future, will these turbines be able to provide enough energy to service that?
Yes, so the research we conducted through the Stellenbosch University, we looked at quantifying the offshore wind energy resources at two sort of scenarios. So first of all, we looked at a shallow water scenario, which explored water depth up to a depth of 50 meters. And this was sort of simulated to kind of predict what we can get from fixed bottom offshore wind, which is one of the main technology types. And if we look at this shallow water scenario, we can harness a offshore wind potential of about 45 terawatt hours per annum. So in layman's terms, this could pretty much satisfy 15% of South Africa's annual energy demand. And just converting this to even a more relatable figure, this could power approximately 4 million average South African households. And then if we look at the deep water scenario, and this is a scenario to a depth of about 1,000 meters. Jeez. And this is the scenario that will be accessed using the other type of technology, which is floating offshore wind. And this is more of the emerging side of offshore wind, but this is very much the future. So if we look at this floating scenario, we can harness up to 2,300 terawatt hours per annum. And
Sure.
again, this would satisfy South Africa's current annual electricity demand 8 times over. And again, relating this to a number of households, this would satisfy or provide electricity to 218 million South African average households.
Wow.
Well, of course, solutions do cost quite a bit. And if I think about it, there are some interesting things infrastructure-wise, but just anecdotally, ideal locations. We know Cape Town and Gqeberha, those areas love the wind. Are we talking about those offshore areas being ideal for these types of wind turbines?
Yes, so the second primary goal of our research was to locate the most suitable locations within South Africa's exclusive economic zone. And in order to do this, we used an ArcGIS-based multi-criteria decision-making methodology. And like you say, we looked at wind resources as one of the factors, but then we also had to factor in ocean bathymetry. We had to look at access to the Eskom grid, and then also proximity to commercial harbors, which would be used as our operation and maintenance, as well as construction sort of hosts. So using all of these data layers, we were able to pinpoint a few locations along the South African coastline. And the research pointed immediately towards the KZN coastline, looking more specifically at the area between Ballito and Durban. And then the second province that obviously flared up was the Western Cape, due to its massive wind resources. So looking at a provincial level, it was looking at KZN was flagged, and so was the Western Cape flagged for having very good potential for offshore wind development.
Oh, well, Gordon, man, it's such an enriching pleasure to have you in the studio and talking about something which is a little bit more greener and something that I think is so important. But thank you for sharing your knowledge with us this morning, man.
Only a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Now wind turbines, something for the future. We hope that comes through sooner rather than later. But for now, thanks a lot for sharing the social vibes with entrepreneurship, as well as if you do want to start a company, what would that be? Let's take a look at some of your comments.